Happy New Year's Eve, BookTube. This is Peg at the History Shelf. I'm making one final video in the final waning hours of 2019. I thought it would be appropriate to also do a favorite books of 2019 video. I've seen so many other great booktubers out there showing their favorites, and it just seemed right that I would do mine as well. The first thing I'd like to say, though, before I jump into, I have about 10 books here to go through, is to say thank you. This is my first year as a booktuber. I started very late in the year after I was finished with school. I think I started in September, early September. So it's been a fabulous 3 months. Gosh, it feels like it's been longer than that, but I've been having a great time, and I just want to thank all of you for watching and commenting and subscribing. Thank you so much. I'm really excited for 2020 and what we can do together, what we can read together, what we can talk about. So I'm just so happy to be here. I'm so glad everyone's just embraced and opened me with open arms. Embraced me with open arms, I should say. So thank you. Thank you very much. And let's see what else. Okay, so I have about 10 books here. They will not be ranked. I don't really like ranking books, but I think Jason at Byways and Bookland said it nicely in his video, that, you know, just these are the books that were important to me, that made a difference in a way, or changed my way of thinking, or made me think of something in a different way, or I just learned something new. So these are those books. So I hope you enjoy. We'll start with a book that actually I am going to include it in 2019, even though technically I finished it December 23rd, 2018. But I really feel like, because I haven't had a chance to really talk about it too much, it should be in this video. So we'll start with this book right here, The Best Land Under Heaven. The Donner Party in the Age of Manifest Destiny by Michael Wallace. Wow, this book, it's a nice big hefty book. Probably the best book I've read on the Donner Party, ever. And it just, I hadn't read about the Donner Party in many years, and so much of it has been sensationalized on TV and documentaries and things like that. But this book was very thoughtful. It really treated the people with dignity, and didn't sensationalize just the utter suffering these travelers, these pilgrims, I mean, what do you want to call them, the settlers, what they went through was really, really, I'm sorry, guess, okay, so now that's Gidget behind me. I told you, every video, I had a break on the 2 videos I made today where they were quiet. And Gidget's rolling around in her toy. You know what? It's New Year's Eve party. You know, live your best life, Gidge. Maybe I'll get her on camera here at the end. Anyway, this was a very thoughtful book. I loved how the people were treated with humanity. The suffering was not oversold. It was pretty wrenching to read, but also just the descriptions of the land, the rescue attempts, just the whole notion of manifest destiny and how it ties in with American history. This was a really fabulous book. So I imagine you could probably find this book for super cheap. It's probably a bargain book at some point right about now. But anyway, The Best Land Under Heaven, I highly recommend. All right, so let's start that one, since it kind of came in at the tail end of last year. And then we'll move on from there. And in the course of my studies for my degree in history, I came across, this was assigned as a textbook. And we were only assigned to read like 3 chapters out of it. Well, I was so intrigued by the material that I just said, I'm reading this entire thing from beginning to end again. And this was a very impactful book. And I highly recommend it to everyone out there. This is Cotton and Race in the Making of America, The Human Costs of Economic Power by Gene Dadel. Gene Dadel has a recent book that's out about reckoning with race, which I want to read. It's a very new book by him, and this one came out. Um, where is he? This came out 10 years ago, 2009. Gidget. Oh my goodness. Now she's under the tree. I don't know. She's just got like catnip. And you know what was interesting is this before I even get to the contents of the book, I ordered this used, like a used textbook. I got a really great used, very good copy. And I happened to open it up. I bought a used copy for like $5, and it is, look at that. It's autographed. It's inscribed by the author. It says, "For Tom, best wishes, Gene." So I was like, oh, well, not Tom, but dang, that's pretty cool. So I have a signed first edition of this book. Seriously, though, in this book it was praised to the high heavens. We've got everyone from H.W. Brands, Henry Kaufman, even Neil Ferguson commented on this book. But the whole premise of this is how the lucrative nature of the cotton crop, more so than tobacco, sugar, and tobacco, more so than those other crops, cotton, and especially once the cotton gin was invented, it ensured the continuation of slavery in America past where the point where it was already beginning to die out. But then it became such an economic boom that it could make people millionaires. And obviously the plantation owners in the South, the amount of money to outlay for a venture in cotton was far. It was like a drop in the bucket to what you could earn. And then they started clamoring for the slave trade to begin again. And it goes into the economics of cotton, but also speaking about how slaves were then shuttled and moved from the previous places where they were working on certain crops to the more fruitful, the cotton growing states such as Mississippi and things like that. And the human toll, as the subtitle indicates, the human costs of economic power. It really opened a door I had never, in all my previous history classes in school as a kid and growing up, they never spoke about that. Just how money and trade and things like this could have an impact on an institution that was intrinsically so evil and antithetical to the precepts of this country. And it wasn't just the South. So that's the other thing, too, this book really opened up my eyes about. Apparently New York City was one of the most pro-slavery cities in the entire Union just because they had invested so heavily in the South. And the ports were just booming, and so the merchants and the traders there were not looking for this to end anytime soon. So it goes to show how the power of greed, the love of money, not money itself, but the love of money, really is the root of all evil. And but this is such a scholarly book. I can't recommend it enough. It deserves another reread. I need to reread this a few more times because there's so much data in here, and it's outstanding. It's outstanding. So if you're interested and if you want any additional information on this, let me know. I can link you to a page with some more information because it's just really so in depth. But it's about a 300-page book. Really, the highlight of 2019 as far as reading something and having your mind blown, it was this book right here. All right, moving on. In addition to that book, also around the Civil War era, or antebellum era, I should say, this was also another textbook that I had to read for antebellum American history class. And this is, I'm sure many of you who are into history and Civil War history and Reconstruction history know this author. This is Eric Foner. He's very well known. And this was Free Soil, Free Labor, Free Men, the ideology of the Republican Party before the Civil War. So what this book did for me, as well as filling me in on the Republican Party, and what their policies were prior to the Civil War, it showed me that while it sounds so great, free soil, free labor, free men, you have to understand what was behind the intentions behind saying we're for free soil, free labor, and free men. Free labor meant that the North wanted to see all labor, from the highest to the lowest, given respect and dignity. But that really never included the black person, the African American. They wanted to see that free labor white men of lower standing had a better standing. And that free soil meant that slavery should not go any further west. The slave owners wanted to push slavery into the new lands, the new states that were being formed, and that's when you have the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and all of these things that really started to just spin the wheel towards Civil War. I mean, things were moving in that direction, but it really picked up speed once people talked about the territories, and would they be free or would they be slave? So the Republican Party wanted these territories to be free soil and free labor, so that white men would have a chance to populate those lands, and not, and we're not talking about the aristocrats. They're anti-aristocratic, the Republican Party at the time. And many people were abolitionists. This is true in the Republican Party, but not all of them believed that white people and African Americans were equals by any means, but they believed in people being paid for their labor, and so there was that. But I mean, this book really sheds a lot of light on the intentions, the real meaning of free soil, free labor. So this was a really good read, and again, it taught me something I hadn't known before, and it showed me again that racism was not endemic just to the South. If anything, it could be just as even more racist in the North, which actually Gene Dadel talks about in Cotton and the Race and the Making of America, because he talks about after the war how people in the South, the ex-slaves, they were finding as sharecroppers they could not make a living. Reconstruction was breaking down; it wasn't working, and they all basically had a mass exodus to the North. And the North didn't. They were like, we don't. They were just like, we don't want you, and it was just really horrible. It was horrible, and really, really a dark chapters in our history. But so these are worth reading. You really need to know how the political parties, what their planks were, what their stances were. I mean, I've always said that the Democrats were by the worst during this time frame. They were rabid secessionists, anti-reconstructionists, and segregationists, but and also racist. But the same thing could be said for the North as far as the racism goes. And it's heavy stuff, but I think it's important stuff to read. So, Free Soil, Free Labor, Free Men by Eric Foner was one of the really important books of 2019 for me. Okay, and then moving on, I'll save my one last Civil War book. I don't want to be too heavy in the Civil War right now. Okay, so I've talked about this book before. You guys have heard me mention it and how I've raved about it. But by far, Midnight in Chernobyl by Adam Higginbotham. The Untold Story of the World's Greatest Nuclear Disaster. This was a page-turner, and I've always been fascinated with obviously Russian and Russian history, and then the disaster at Chernobyl has always fixed my attention to a large degree in how it affected the coming of the end of the Soviet Union. And Adam Higginbotham just does an amazing job. He just takes you right there. And this was a fairly large book, but so well researched. The footnotes are endless. A great bibliography if you wanted to keep researching more. And yeah, it's about 380 pages. But you should see all of the footnotes. It's just, I mean, there's got to be 150 pages here of footnotes and bibliography. One of my favorites. I couldn't stop reading it. And shortly before I read this book in December of last year, I had finished an audio book by Serhii Plokhy, and his book came out first on Chernobyl. I think it was called The Anatomy of a Disaster, the Chernobyl, and I really enjoyed that too. But this one, I highly recommend it. This was a great book for 2019. Okay, so far I've gone through 4, so I'll try to pick up speed here. All right. Well, I have to say I have a soft spot for this book for many reasons. This was a book that started me on writing reviews at Steve Donahue's Open Letters Review. I had mentioned, he had shown this book on his channel, and I had been waiting for it, like on pre-order. I just couldn't wait to get it, to read it, and I mentioned, oh, I'm so jealous. I've been wanting to read this book, and he suggested, oh, would you consider writing a review? And the rest is history, as they say. But this is Assad or We Burn the Country by Sam Dagger. How one family's lust for power destroyed Syria. And this is a whopper. This is a nice big chunker. I wrote a review. It's at Open Letters Review if you're interested. I have a bunch of notes I wrote for the review. I still have it in the book. It chronicles, it chronicles 2 events. It chronicles like the you call it like the Arab Spring that began in 2011, and then the crackdown by Bashar, the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad. But it also talks about his family, how he grew up, and then it talked about the events and talks about the protesters and the people who were fighting for freedom in Syria, and how people were just brutalized by their own government. I mean, it's heavy. It's not happy stuff at all. If anything, it puts into perspective things that you might see for a second on the evening news before you turn the channel, because you just don't want to see anything that bums you out like that. But people live this, and I don't even know how. I don't even know how they live it, but people do, and it's important. It's important to know, to at least to say that you know that people are going through this in the world, and if there's a way that you can use that consciousness of knowing to raise awareness, then maybe there's something that can be done. I don't know. Our country's foreign policy towards Syria is a mess. It's an absolute mess. There's no coherence, and there hasn't been for decades. I mean, it's not one person. We've just been meddling and not understanding a culture. We've not been understanding. We haven't been understanding a key thing about history, which is, in the case of Assad, we assume that Assad would want to have a democratic country, that freedom is a universal value. And it's not. It's not a universal value, because other people, such as these dictators and the people they employ, they value something more highly than freedom, and they value power at all costs. So it's something we should always remember, that not everyone is looking to be free or to have their people be free. It was a fantastic book, and I can't recommend it enough. Okay, and then back to my, this is a book that I enjoyed even though I was using it for my thesis. And you've seen me hold this up before. This is Gordon C. Ray's The Battle of the Wilderness, May 5th through 6th of 1864. I still have all my my notes in here, my little flags. This was a fantastic book of military campaigning that is not boring. I'm working through a book right now on the campaign of Petersburg. And I know Sharon Goforth, we were doing a buddy read on that. She already finished the book. I got sick, so I fell behind. I'm still reading it. I'm about 190, 200 pages in. But I'm finding the writing about the movements, the troop movements, is a little too. There's nothing. It's just too. It's too it's too technical. It's too dry. Whereas Gordon Ray is doing the same thing. He's telling us about minute movements of companies, battalions, but he's at the same time he's weaving in energy, weaving in tension, weaving in personalities and characters and dialogue through letters and orders. So I loved how Gordon Ray has done that, and I hope the other book will pick up. I hope maybe it's just the way. It's just the beginning of it. It's supposed to be the first in a trilogy. So we'll see. But I love Gordon C. Ray. I read the second book on the Battle of Spotsylvania, and I am in the midst of the third volume because it's a 5-volume study of the Overland Campaign. And I'm in the third book, which takes us to the North Anna River. But anyway, The Battle of the Wilderness, fabulous. It's a great standout book for 2019. Okay, and then, let's see, I think one of the books I actually loaned to my sister, and it was the Lone Book of Fiction, but you've heard me mention it here before. It was a mystery thriller series that I've just begun, and it was Raven Black by Anne Cleves. As I said, I would hold it up here, but I recommended it to my sister, and I loaned it to her. So I am reading the second book in the series right now, White Nights. I'm really enjoying the detective and the single mom in the book so far. It's Detective Jimmy Perez, and it's set in the Shetland Isles. And so that was a big standout as far as fiction goes, and I really enjoyed that. Okay, so these last 3 books are all ones that came in right under the wire, you guys. This is another book I wrote a review for on Open Letters Review. This was The Will of the People, A Revolutionary Birth of America by T.H. Breen. It's a slim volume, but it was very meaty. It was it's very intellectual, but easy to read. It basically tells about how the power of the people to, survive the revolution, it came from the local, like you all say, like, think globally, act locally or whatever. But, what Breen does here is says, without the people that actually put into practice the principles that the highly educated founding fathers, the more elite aristocratic ones, were writing about, they were living it at a local level. They were policing their communities. They were instilling, they were abiding by the principles that were being put forth by the founding fathers. And that to survive the revolution, which became such a grind and such a, people were suffering economically, and, not just with, the death of fathers and brothers and husbands, but just the economics of it and how people would police the patriotism of others. Well, that sounds bad, but I think what I'm trying to say is they would look at others who were fleecing the community, trying to hike prices when inflation was going through the roof, and they would take people to task and say, look, we are trying to survive this, we're trying to win this war to begin a new country. And they came together and in a local way exercise that patriotism to make sure that they survived, and they were there and supporting one another. I just found it a very uplifting read that reminded me of the best of this country and what it should be about, which is acting locally, supporting your neighbor, um, acting in justice and fairness, and you know, living those rules that were put down in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, or those precepts. So this was a fantastic book. It's a small little volume, but it packs a punch, and I highly recommend it. Again, I wrote a review for that, an Open Letters review. And then just under the wire, as I said, recently finished. I like a good polar expedition story. Who doesn't, right? And I did finish The Labyrinth of Ice, The Triumphant and Tragic Greeley Polar Expedition by Buddy Levy. I've written a review, and we'll see if it's accepted. But I wrote a review, and we'll see. I'd like to share it with you guys at some point. I'm not sure where it will be posted, but I thought Buddy Levy did a fantastic job. He just spun such a good, you want to call it like an adventure yarn. But again, I love stories about man versus nature, and man versus himself. And there's a lot of that in this book. There's a lot of survival. There's a lot of the best of humanity. There's a lot of the worst. But I think in the end, there's more good than bad. And it just, I don't know, it's uplifting, because there are a lot of the characters in this book, the people who went through this, they exhibited the ultimate in selflessness and giving and endurance. And it just makes you shake your head sometimes, like, wow, I just can't imagine people going through that and still maintaining, a certain sense of kindness and looking out for others. I mean, there's a scene in here where the men were getting so weak from starvation, and the leader of the Adolphus Greeley, he was the commander, he was holding men in his arms, feeding them, getting them to drink whatever they were putting into this broth for sustenance. I mean, at one point it was like leather soles from the shoes, it was just horrific. And he would try to nurse men, and he would hold them in his arms, and many of them died in his arms. So I thought it was a beautiful book in many ways, and it was just artfully told. It weaved in the chapters into a tension of, like, will the rescuers get there? And you kind of jump from the relief people, the rescue people, the people in Washington trying to put together the rescue mission, back to the suffering men. So it just it moved like a movie in many ways. So I really liked Labyrinth of Ice, and I finished it just like a couple weeks ago. So it came in just under the wire to be a favorite book for 2019. So highly recommend. And that just came out on December 3rd, so it's a brand new book. And then I'm going to end on this book, which I just did a book review for. I wasn't expecting it to move me like it did, but it did. And this is Just Another Day in Vietnam by Colonel Retired Keith M. Nightingale. And let me just say right now, I apologize. In my last video, a couple of times I said Lieutenant Colonel. So Colonel, I know you're a Colonel. It's Colonel Keith M. Nightingale. And this book was very, very profound. If you want to know about this book, if you just, go to my channel, look for that book review video. I just posted it earlier today. It'll give you a taste of what this book is about. It's a war memoir. It is written very inventively in third person. He did a lot of research to gain the insights into what the opposite side was going through during this battle, and so between the Viet Cong and then the American and the South Vietnamese forces. So just finished it. I finished reading it today, and I decided, you know what? I love this book. So this really came in under the wire, the last day of 2019, and Just Another Day in Vietnam. So guys, those are my important books, or my favorite books of 2019. Now, it wasn't so hard for me to choose, just because I only had 30 books, around 30 books finished for the year, but I really hope to have more read next year, so I'll have many more to try to pick from. But yeah, well, let me know what you think of some of these titles. If you've read them, again, any thoughts? Oh, and by the way, If I do have any duplicate books that I ordered for my last book haul that I mentioned, I will send you a free book if you know the reference on this shirt. What's going on? All right.
It's too easy.
Oh, it's not too easy.
Yes, yes.
Martine thinks it's too easy. I don't. Yeah, right there. One of my favorite hoodies. So, if there's multiples of you who get the answer right, I'll just put names in a hat, and I'll see what I can do for you guys. But anyway, geez, what time is it? It is 7:30 here in Denver, Colorado. So wherever you are, if you're nearing the midnight hour, if you are hours behind me, wherever you are in the world, or if you're already in 2020, again, let me just say Happy New Year's to you and yours. Thank you again for a wonderful year. And I've only been here on BookTube a few months, but I love it. I can't imagine going without it. And thanks for sticking with me through sickness and in health. You guys are awesome. So anyway, I will see you guys next year. Bye.